Hello and welcome back to the English Talk community. I'm Julia, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Whether you're listening during your morning walk, while doing the dishes, or on your way to work or school, thank you for making time for yourself and your English. This space is all about helping you become more confident and natural when you speak English. Not perfect, just real, relaxed, and expressive. That's our goal here. Let me ask you something. Do you understand English when you hear it? Maybe. Even watch entire movies or YouTube videos without subtitles, but still feel stuck when it's your turn to speak? Maybe you know the words, you recognize the grammar, but when you try to say something, everything just freezes in your head. You start thinking, wait, how do I say this? Let me translate it first. And suddenly, it feels like your brain just shuts down. If that sounds familiar, believe me, you're not alone. That moment when your thoughts are clear in your native language, but completely blurry in English, it's frustrating. It can make you feel like you're not making progress. Like all the time you spent learning vocabulary and grammar somehow isn't enough. But let me tell you a secret. It's not about learning more words. It's not about studying harder. Most of the time, the real problem is that you're still trying to think in your native language and translate everything into English. And today, we're going to talk about how to stop doing that. I know how uncomfortable it is when you're in a conversation and you're trying to listen and respond. But your brain is busy translating each sentence like a robot. You get stuck in this mental loop. You hear something in English, you translate it to your native language to understand it, then think of your answer in your language, and translate it back to English before you speak. That process takes so long, right? It's like trying to run a race while carrying heavy bags. You're working twice as hard for half the result. But what if you didn't have to do that anymore? What if you could just think directly in English, like when you speak your first language? Imagine how much more fluid, natural, and relaxed your conversations would be. I know it might sound impossible now, but trust me, this is a skill. And like any other skill, you can train it. Today we're going to explore what it means to think in English, why translating is slowing you down, and how you can make the shift to thinking directly in English, one step at a time. But before we dive in, I want to ask you to do something simple that really helps us grow this community. If this podcast has helped you in any way, or if you're new here and already finding this useful, go ahead and hit that like button or tap that follow button, depending on where you're listening. That small action tells the platforms that this is valuable content. It helps other learners like you discover it, and it keeps this project alive. So if you're enjoying this already, take a second now. Thank you so much. Now back to your English journey. One thing I want you to know from the start is this. You're not broken. You're not failing. If you're translating in your head, it's not because you're doing something wrong. It's just how your brain has been trained until now. Most language learning in schools is based on translating. The teacher gives you a word in English, then gives the equivalent in your language. You memorize it. Then you learn grammar rules in your native language to describe how English works. That's how most of us start, and that's okay. It's a beginning. But if you want to speak fluently, naturally, and confidently, at some point you have to move away from translation. Let me share a quick story. A few months ago, I got an email from a listener named Marcella. She's from São Paulo, Brazil, and she told me how she's been studying English since she was a teenager. She's now in her 30s, she understands everything she reads, and even watches Netflix without subtitles. But in meetings at work, she freezes. She told me, "Julia, when I try to speak, My brain panics. I hear my boss ask something in English, and I know what he said, but then I start translating my answer in Portuguese before I respond. By the time I try to say it, the moment is gone. Can you relate to that? I certainly can. Marcella's experience is not rare. In fact, it's one of the most common things I hear. You feel like you know English, but it doesn't come out naturally. That's why today's topic is so important. When you learn to think in English, you break free from that loop. You don't waste mental energy translating. You just speak. Even if it's simple, even if it's not perfect, it's real communication. And that's what fluency truly is. So how do we start this process? How do we go from translating everything in our heads to thinking directly in English? That's what we're going to explore today, step by step, with examples and stories from people around the world who've made this shift. But first, I want you to ask yourself something, and really be honest here. When you speak English, do you feel like you're thinking in English? Or do you translate first? There's no shame in your answer. We all start somewhere. In fact, I remember when I was learning my second language. I kept translating in my head for months. It felt safe, but it also felt slow. And one day I realized I didn't want to feel like a student forever. I wanted to feel like someone who lives in the language, not just studies it. And that started with small changes, not big ones. Tiny moments of choosing to think in English instead of translating. And you can do the same. If you've ever felt nervous about speaking because you didn't know if your translation was correct, if you've ever kept quiet in a conversation because your sentence was still under construction in your mind, if you've ever said, "I know what I want to say, but I don't know how to say it in English," then I want you to stay with me. You are exactly who this episode is for. You've already done the hard part. You've learned the language, you've practiced listening, you've built vocabulary. Now it's time to take the next step. Stop thinking about English and start thinking in English. You don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to begin. And we're going to do that together. Ready? Let's go. What if I told you that the secret to speaking English more naturally isn't learning more words, or studying harder, or even practicing longer? What if the real key is something much simpler? Something you're probably not even aware you're doing right now? What if I told you that the thing slowing you down the most is that quiet habit in your mind? The habit of translating everything before you speak. Think about it. Every time you hear someone ask a question in English, your brain starts working in the background. You understand the question, but your answer forms in your native language first. Then you try to translate that answer into English. But the sentence in your language doesn't always match the structure of English. Maybe you don't know the exact word you need. Maybe you doubt the grammar. So you hesitate. You pause. And by the time you're ready to speak, the moment has passed. That's not a problem with your English level. That's the result of translation slowing your brain down. This is the problem we're going to solve. Today, I want to show you how to stop translating in your head and start thinking in English. Not only is it possible, it's easier than you think when you start with the right mindset and small changes. I've worked with learners from all over the world. Diego from Mexico City, Layla from Casablanca, Arjun from Mumbai, and Sarah from Berlin. Each of them had a solid foundation in English. They knew the rules, the vocabulary, and the correct pronunciation. But they all had one thing in common. They couldn't speak fluidly because their minds were stuck in the translation loop. The good news is that once they understood what was happening and made a shift in how they thought. Their spoken English changed dramatically. And you can do the same. The first step is awareness. You need to notice that this habit of translating is happening. And then, little by little, you replace it with a new habit, thinking directly in English. Let's be honest. The translation habit starts early. For most people, language learning begins in a classroom. You're given a list of words in English, and their meanings in your native language. You learn that apple means this, and book means that. You build your vocabulary through translation. You learn grammar rules explained in your language. And while this system helps you begin, it also builds a dependency. Your brain gets used to processing English through a filter. It doesn't trust itself to think directly in English, because it's never been trained that way. So what happens? You memorize English, but you don't own it. You carry it like a dictionary in your mind, always flipping back and forth. That's why you can read and listen with no problem, but when it's time to speak, you hesitate. That's why even after years of study, you might still feel uncomfortable talking to a native speaker or participating in a meeting in English. Not because you don't know English, but because your mind hasn't made the switch yet. And making that switch, that's what will unlock your fluency. Let me tell you about a man named Karim from Cairo. He reached out to me after listening to a few episodes of this podcast. Karim had a great job at a tech company, and part of his role involved communicating with international clients. His reading and writing skills were excellent, but speaking always made him nervous. He told me, "Julia, I know exactly what I want to say, but when I open my mouth, I get stuck. I think the sentence in Arabic, then try to change it to English, but it never comes out right." Karim's problem wasn't vocabulary. It wasn't grammar. It was translation. I worked with Karim to identify where that habit showed up in his daily routine. He noticed that even when he was thinking to himself, during his commute, while checking emails or reviewing tasks, he was doing it in Arabic. So I gave him a simple challenge. I said, "Don't speak out loud. Don't write anything. Just think in English for 5 minutes while you're brushing your teeth or preparing your lunch. That's all. No pressure to speak perfectly. Just think." And after just 1 week, Karim told me he felt something change. His responses during meetings came faster. His confidence increased. He said, "It's like I gave my brain permission to use English without needing to translate." That's the power of switching your internal voice, and maybe you've never thought about it like that before. That the language in your thoughts matters just as much as the language in your speech. But it does, because fluency isn't just about your mouth, it's about your mind. If you want to speak fluently, you have to think fluently first. So let me ask you something. Right now, as you're listening to me, what language are your thoughts in? Be honest. Are you thinking about my words in English, or are you mentally translating everything I say into your native language to understand it? It's okay if you are. That's normal, but noticing that habit is the first step to changing it. Another listener, Yuki from Tokyo, told me something that really stuck with me. She said, "I realized that even when I dreamed, the people in my dreams were speaking Japanese, even if the dream took place in another country." That made her realize how deeply her brain was still holding on to her first language, even in her imagination. So she started making a simple effort. When she imagined conversations or planned her day in her head, she did it in English. At first, it felt strange, but over time it became natural. And guess what? Her spoken English became smoother Not because she learned anything new, but because she changed the language of her thoughts. This is what I want you to start doing. I want you to shift your mental habits. Begin noticing when you're translating. Then interrupt the pattern. Choose a simple sentence you already know in English and say it to yourself. Don't aim for complexity. Don't try to impress anyone. Just be clear and honest with your own thoughts. In English, you don't need to be in a conversation to start thinking in English. You can do it while waiting in line, walking your dog, or lying in bed before you fall asleep. Use those moments to build new connections in your mind. Instead of thinking, I need to do laundry, think, I have to wash my clothes. Instead of imagining your grocery list in your language, think of the items in English: eggs, milk, rice, bread. These tiny shifts are the building blocks of fluency. And the best part? You don't need anyone else to practice them. Fluency isn't about translating fast. It's about not translating at all. When you stop translating, you stop second-guessing yourself. You stop hesitating. You start speaking from your thoughts, not from a mental dictionary. And that changes everything. Because the truth is, you already have more English inside you than you think. It's just waiting for you to unlock it. If you're here listening, right now, I want to take a moment to thank you for being part of this experience. I know how much courage it takes to commit to learning a language. It's not just about studying words or understanding grammar rules. It's about showing up day after day, even when it feels slow, even when it's frustrating. And if you're doing that, it means you care about your growth. You're not just learning English. You're transforming the way you express yourself in the world. That's powerful. And I want to invite you to go one step further with me. If you're someone who wants to speak English with more confidence and ease, someone who wants to stop overthinking every sentence, someone who wants to finally feel natural when speaking, this podcast is for you. What we do here, week after week, is not just teach you tips or list vocabulary. We help you build a mindset that supports real fluency. We help you connect the language with your daily life, with your emotions, with your goals. And I truly believe that the best way to grow in a language is by being part of a community that lifts you up and keeps you inspired. So, if that sounds like something you want, if you're tired of learning alone, or if you've ever felt like no one really understands the challenges you face with English, then I want to invite you to join our community. And it's really simple. Just like this episode, and subscribe to this podcast. That's it. When you do that, you're not just supporting the show. You're saying yes to your own journey. You're saying, I'm ready to be part of something bigger. I'm ready to grow. And here's the truth. When you surround yourself with people who share the same goals, your progress becomes more natural. You stop feeling like you're the only one struggling. You stop comparing yourself to people who've been speaking English for years. Instead, you focus on what matters. Showing up, practicing, and growing at your own pace. That's what this podcast is here to do. Not to pressure you, not to overwhelm you, but to support you every step of the way. We've had listeners from cities all over the world, from Paris to Sao Paulo, from Manila to Istanbul, from Johannesburg to Toronto. And what they all have in common is this. They want to speak English with more confidence. They want to be able to say what they think, to connect with people, to succeed in their careers and personal lives using English. And they want to enjoy the process, not feel like it's a burden. That's what I want for you too. So let me ask you, are you ready to make that commitment to yourself? Are you ready to stop waiting for the perfect time or the perfect sentence? Because I can tell you, There's no perfect moment. The best time to grow is now. And if this podcast has already given you something valuable, a new perspective, a helpful tip, a moment where you said, "Yes, that's exactly how I feel," then let it be the sign you've been waiting for. Go ahead and tap that like button, subscribe to the show, and share it with someone you know who's also learning English. Maybe it's a friend, a coworker, or a classmate. Maybe it's someone who's been struggling silently, just like you were. You never know how much difference one small gesture can make in someone else's journey. And by sharing this, you're not just helping them, you're reinforcing your own commitment. One thing I've learned through working with so many English learners is that transformation doesn't happen alone. It happens in community. It happens when you feel seen, when you feel heard, and when you know that others are walking the same path with you. That's what we've built here. A place where you can learn, grow, and feel supported, even if we've never met in person. Because language is about connection. It's about understanding and being understood. And you deserve to feel that in English too. So let this be your moment. If you've ever listened to an episode and thought, "I really needed to hear this today," then take that next step, like the episode. Subscribe to the channel. That's how you stay connected. That's how you keep the momentum going. And that's how you show yourself that your goal, speaking English confidently, is important. You don't have to do this perfectly. You don't need to impress anyone. You just need to show up and be willing to grow. I'll be here to guide you, to encourage you, and to remind you that it's possible. Because I've seen it happen again and again. So, if you're ready to make progress that actually feels good, if you're ready to stop overthinking and start speaking more freely, then don't wait. Be part of this journey with us. Like the episode, subscribe, join our community. You belong here, and I can't wait to keep learning with you. When I first started learning English more seriously, I remember one moment that really stuck with me. I was about 16 years old, and I had been watching American TV shows and listening to pop music almost every day, thinking I was really picking up the language. I felt pretty confident that I could understand everything. But speaking, that was a whole different story. One day, during a conversation in an English class, I wanted to say something simple. Something like, "I'm excited about the weekend." But I didn't know how to say it properly. So I translated it directly, from my native language, word by word. What came out was something like, "I have emotion for the weekend." And I said it with such pride, thinking I'd nailed it. The look on my teacher's face was a mix of confusion and amusement. She smiled kindly and said, "You mean, you're excited?" I nodded, and that's when she gently explained that, in English, saying, "I have emotion," sounds a bit strange, like I was having a dramatic movie moment. I laughed, but deep down I was embarrassed. I thought I was doing so well, and then that one mistake reminded me how much I still had to learn. But here's what I want you to take from that story. I survived that moment. It didn't end my journey. In fact, looking back, it became one of my favorite memories because it reminded me that making mistakes is not just normal. It's necessary. Every learner, no matter how talented or motivated, goes through these little awkward moments. They're part of the process. And if you've had one of those moments, maybe you said something that didn't come out right, or someone looked at you funny after a sentence. Welcome to the club. I once had a student from Milan who told me she was nervous about speaking English at work. She said she always thought in Italian first, then tried to translate. And during a presentation, she meant to say, "Let's keep things simple." But what came out was, "Let's stay little." Her colleague smiled, but she was mortified. Later, she told me that moment haunted her for weeks. But when we talked about it, I asked her, "Did they understand what you meant?" She said yes. "Then it worked," I told her. And now you'll never forget the difference between simple and little. It's these moments, the ones that make us laugh at ourselves, that help us learn the most. And sometimes, bringing humor into the journey makes it easier to move forward. I've met learners from Tokyo, from Berlin, from Cape Town, and from New York City who all have their own versions of these little stories. A man from Seoul told me he once tried to impress his date by saying, "You are the sugar of my life," thinking it was romantic. She laughed, and so did he, because language is full of funny turns, and it's okay to get lost sometimes. The truth is, no one expects you to speak perfectly. Think about it. Even native speakers mess up. They forget words, they start sentences and change their minds halfway through. They make grammar mistakes. But because they're not overthinking, no one even notices. And that's what I want you to remember. The pressure to be perfect is something we often create in our own minds. I remember once I was trying to ask someone at a cafe in London if the table was free. I had practiced the sentence in my head, "Is this seat taken?" But at the last second I panicked and said, "Is this chair busy?" The man just looked at me for a second, then said with a smile, "No, it's all yours." We both laughed. I had been so tense about getting the sentence right, and in the end it didn't even matter. The communication worked. And that's what really matters. I know what it feels like to freeze when you want to say something. To have the words sitting in your mind, but your brain gets stuck translating, and your mouth just doesn't cooperate. It can feel frustrating, like you're always one step behind the conversation. But that doesn't mean you're not capable. It just means your brain is still adjusting to this new way of thinking. You don't have to hide your mistakes. You don't have to feel ashamed if something comes out a little weird. That's the beauty of learning. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and sometimes it's even hilarious. One of the best things you can do is learn to laugh at those awkward moments. They're not signs of failure. They're signs that you're trying, that you're pushing your limits, and that you're brave enough to keep going. A learner from Warsaw once told me, "I wish I could speak without sounding like a robot." And I told him, "Then stop trying to be perfect." Robots sound perfect. Humans don't. When we speak naturally, we make little errors. We pause, we correct ourselves, we use gestures, and all of that is part of real communication. So if you've ever had one of those moments, maybe you said something funny without realizing it, or someone corrected your English gently, just know that you're not alone. I've been there. Every learner has. And in a few months or years, you might look back and tell that story with a smile, because it will remind you how far you've come. The more relaxed you become, the easier it is to think in English. When you stop fearing mistakes, you start learning faster. You start listening more closely. You begin to trust yourself. And most importantly, you start enjoying the journey. That's what I want for you. To enjoy it. To be okay with the bumps in the road. To find joy in the progress, even when it's slow. Because one day, you'll speak a full sentence in English without even realizing it. And when that happens, I hope you remember these little stories and smile. Let's talk about something that might be the biggest reason why so many people understand English perfectly, but still struggle to speak it. Translating in your head. If you're doing this, don't worry. Almost everyone does it at some point in their learning journey. I did it too. It's a natural habit when you're used to thinking in your native language. But here's the truth. If you keep translating every sentence in your head before speaking, you're building a wall between yourself and fluency. And I want to show you why. When you translate in your mind, what you're really doing is slowing yourself down. Think about it like this. First, your brain thinks of a sentence in your native language. Then, it tries to find the English words to match. After that, it checks if the grammar sounds right. Finally, you try to say it. By the time all of this happens, the conversation has probably moved on. The person you're talking to might already be waiting, and you feel that pressure building inside. And that's when you freeze or second-guess yourself. All of this creates stress, which makes it even harder to speak clearly. Let me give you an example. Imagine a learner from Istanbul who wants to say something simple, like, "I woke up late today." But in his native language, the sentence has a completely different structure. Maybe the verb comes at the end. So when he tries to speak, he thinks, "Okay, how do I say today? Then woke up. Wait, do I need was in there?" And by the time he speaks, it's either too late or too shaky. The sentence might come out confusing or unnatural, and he feels frustrated. Not because he doesn't know the words, but because the process of translating made everything more complicated. This is something I've seen happen with learners from all over the world, from Paris to Bangkok, from Sao Paulo to Toronto. The same pattern appears. The more they rely on translation, the more hesitant they become. And the more hesitant they are, the less confident they feel. Confidence isn't about knowing every word or having perfect grammar. It's about trusting yourself to express your ideas, even if it's not perfect. And that trust comes from thinking directly in English. When you think in English, the process becomes much faster. You don't waste time rearranging words or checking for grammar rules mid-sentence. You just speak. And yes, maybe you make a small mistake. Maybe your sentence isn't perfect. But that's okay. It still sounds more natural, and most importantly, it keeps the conversation flowing. The goal is not to speak like a textbook. The goal is to be understood, to connect, to express yourself. I once worked with a learner from Mumbai who had an amazing vocabulary. He could read articles in English and explain complicated ideas in writing, but when it came to speaking, he froze. When I asked him what was going on in his head during conversations, he said, "I translate every sentence. I think it in Hindi, then I try to fix the grammar in English before I speak." That habit made him overthink everything. So we started practicing short, simple phrases he could use without translation. At first it was difficult, but after a few weeks he started to speak faster. He wasn't translating anymore. He was thinking directly in English. And his confidence grew with every conversation. Now you might be thinking, "But I need to translate. Otherwise I don't know what to say." That's a fair point. At the beginning, translation can feel like a necessary step. But what I want you to understand is that translation is a temporary tool, not a permanent strategy. It's like training wheels on a bicycle. They help in the beginning, but if you keep them on forever, you'll never ride freely. Translating also causes your English to sound a little strange. Different languages have different structures and expressions. When you try to translate phrases word by word, you lose that natural flow. For example, a learner from Berlin once told me, "I have hunger," directly translating from German. But in English we say, "I'm hungry." If you keep translating, you'll end up with sentences that are technically understandable, but don't sound quite right. and this makes conversations feel less smooth and more robotic. Another problem is that translation limits your thinking. If you only speak English using the ideas and structures from your native language, you'll miss out on the expressions and rhythm that make English unique. You'll also miss chances to use phrases that are short, simple, and effective, because you're stuck thinking in a completely different system. So what's the solution? Start small. Start with words and phrases you use often. If you always say, "I'm tired," or "I don't know," practice thinking and saying those without translation. Repeat them until they become automatic. Then build from there. Think about what you want to say before you speak, but in English, not in your native language. It takes time, yes. But every time you do it, you're building a habit that moves you closer to fluency. I always say, fluency doesn't come from memorizing every rule. It comes from removing the barriers between your thoughts and your words. And translation is one of the biggest barriers. Once you stop needing to translate, you'll notice a huge difference, not just in speed, but in confidence, in flow, and in your ability to enjoy conversations. I met a learner from Buenos Aires who had been trying to become fluent for years. She told me that the moment things really changed for her was when she stopped translating. She started thinking in English when she walked, when she cooked, when she talked to herself. At first, it felt strange, but soon it became natural. Her speaking improved faster in 3 months than it had in 3 years. Why? Because she wasn't stuck in the middle anymore. She had made the shift. So if you feel stuck, if you feel like you're always translating and it's slowing you down, you're not alone. But you also don't have to stay in that place. You can change how your brain processes English. You can train it to think directly, clearly, and confidently. It just takes time, repetition, and a little patience with yourself. I want to tell you the story of Karim. He's from Casablanca, Morocco, and he had been learning English for years. He studied grammar, he knew vocabulary, and he understood almost everything he read or heard. But whenever it was time to speak, especially in meetings at work, he froze. His mind would go completely blank, or worse, it would get stuck trying to build the sentence word by word, translating from Arabic into English. And the more pressure he felt to speak clearly, the more his thoughts became a mess of unfinished ideas and half-translated phrases. Karim worked in an international logistics company that often partnered with clients in Europe and North America. While most of his emails were written and reviewed carefully, the challenge came when he had to join video calls. His manager encouraged him to participate more, but Karim kept his microphone off most of the time. He was afraid of making mistakes, afraid of sounding unprofessional. What held him back was not a lack of knowledge. It was the mental habit of translating every thought, every word, before speaking. He told me once, "Julia, I know what I want to say, but by the time I've built the sentence in Arabic and tried to find the right English words, the moment is gone." He felt slow, frustrated, and often embarrassed. And what made it even worse was that during the call, he would understand everything the others were saying. He just couldn't respond with the same speed or fluency. One day, after another difficult meeting, Karim decided he had to change his approach. He said, "If I keep doing the same thing, I'll keep freezing. I need to find a way to think in English." That's when we started working on a new method. One based not on perfect translation or memorizing rules, but on building direct thinking in English. And we kept it simple. Because sometimes, small steps are the ones that open the biggest doors. We began with phrases he used a lot during work meetings. Simple ones like, "I agree," "Let me check," "Can you repeat that?" and I'll send you the report. He practiced these until they became automatic. Not just reading them, but saying them out loud while imagining himself in the middle of a meeting. We role-played short conversations, and he focused on responding without going through Arabic in his head. At first, he was still tempted to translate. Old habits don't disappear overnight. But something started to change. He realized that when he repeated the same English phrase enough times, his brain began to recognize it as a full idea, not just a string of translated words. That phrase started to feel like a complete tool in his communication toolbox, ready to be used at the right moment. Karim also made a small but powerful change to his daily routine. Every morning, before starting work, he would spend 5 minutes thinking about his day in English. He would ask himself questions like, "What are my tasks today?" Or, "Who do I need to email?" And answer in short English sentences. It didn't have to be perfect. The goal was just to build a direct connection between his thoughts and the English language. This daily habit helped him switch his thinking mode from Arabic to English, just like changing the channel on a radio. Over time, Karim became more comfortable in meetings. He started unmuting himself. He began to answer short questions, then to give updates on his projects. He told me, "It's not that I stopped being nervous, but now I trust myself more. The words come faster." His coworkers noticed too. His manager even complimented him on how much more confident he sounded, and that gave him more motivation to keep going. We also talked about how to manage that panic moment. You know, the one where your name is called and suddenly you feel all your English disappearing. Karim learned to use a few set phrases. That gave him time to think without staying silent. For example, when someone asked his opinion, he'd say, "That's a good question. Let me think for a second." Or, "I see your point. Here's what I think." These phrases worked like bridges. They bought him a few extra seconds, and they kept the conversation going while he organized his thoughts. Another practice that helped Karim was listening to real conversations in English, especially from business, podcasts or casual discussions related to his field. But he didn't just listen. He paused and repeated parts out loud. He even tried to predict what someone would say next. This trained his brain to follow the flow of natural speech and to respond without translating. He was no longer just hearing English. He was using it actively, even when no one was around. Eventually, Karim reached a point where he could have spontaneous conversations. Not perfect, but natural. He still made some mistakes here and there, but now those mistakes didn't stop him. He knew the goal wasn't perfection. It was communication. And that shift in mindset changed everything. What I love about Karim's journey is that he didn't wait until he felt completely ready. He started before he was confident. He chose small, manageable practices that fit into his day. And slowly, those practices changed the way he thought. He stopped translating word by word. He started thinking in English. His story is proof that even if you feel stuck now, you can build new habits. You can rewire the way your brain handles English. It's not magic, and it doesn't happen overnight. But if you focus on small, repeated actions, like thinking in short phrases, talking to yourself in English, and practicing real-life situations, you'll start to notice progress. And that progress builds momentum. I always tell my listeners, don't wait for the perfect moment to stop translating. It won't come. Just start today with one phrase, one idea, one simple step. Karim's experience shows that real change happens when you shift your mindset from translating to thinking. And if he could do it, you can too. When we talk about thinking in English, One of the most powerful tools we can use is simple, ready-made phrases. These are phrases you hear all the time in conversations, phrases that native speakers use naturally, without even thinking. I like to call them building blocks because that's exactly what they are. They're not just words or individual pieces of vocabulary. They are full expressions that carry meaning and help you speak more naturally without stopping to translate. Let me give you a few examples. Think of a phrase like, "Can I help you?" or "I'm looking for." These expressions come with a structure already built in. You don't have to figure out the grammar or construct the sentence from scratch every time. If you practice these kinds of phrases regularly, your brain starts recognizing them as one unit. That means you stop thinking of each word separately and instead focus on the message you want to deliver. This is the exact opposite of translating word by word. When you translate, you go through a mental checklist. First, you think in your native language, then you search for the English equivalent of each word, then you try to put it all together in a way that makes sense. It's exhausting, right? It's like trying to write a full sentence while solving a puzzle. No wonder it makes you slow down or freeze during conversations. Now imagine instead that you've trained yourself to use certain patterns automatically. You walk into a store and your brain immediately offers you, "I'm looking for a jacket," or "Do you have this in a medium?" You don't have to stop and think. You don't have to build the sentence from zero. You've already practiced it. And that practice is what makes it feel natural. I've worked with learners from so many different countries. People from Warsaw, from Mumbai, from Sao Paulo, from Cairo, and the one thing they all had in common was this realization. Fluency is not about knowing every word. It's about being ready with the words that you actually need. And those words almost always live in common, simple phrases. Let's say you're at work and you want to start a conversation. You don't need to invent a new sentence every time. You can use patterns like, "I just wanted to check in about," or "Can we talk about the project?" These phrases are polite, effective, and most importantly, familiar. The more you use them, the faster they come to you. And when they come faster, your confidence grows. When I was learning French, I used to think I had to say everything perfectly. I would stop mid-sentence to think, to correct myself, to try to find the exact right word. It made my conversations feel mechanical and slow. But once I started focusing on simple, real-life phrases, ones that people used in cafes or on this metro, I finally began to feel connected to the language. I wasn't just studying anymore. I was communicating. The same is true for English. Think about how children learn language. They don't start with grammar rules or long vocabulary lists. They repeat what they hear. They mimic patterns. "I want juice." "It's my turn." "Let's go." These are short, powerful phrases that carry meaning, and over time, as they hear and use these phrases again and again, they become automatic. So why not take the same approach as adults? Why not focus on the phrases that actually appear in everyday conversation? Things like, "How was your weekend?" or "What do you think?" or "That makes sense." These are useful everywhere, in casual conversations, in meetings, in customer service, in interviews. And they're easy to remember if you repeat them enough times in real situations. One learner I worked with, her name was Elena from Athens, told me she made flashcards, but not with single words. She used full phrases. Every morning she would pick 3 or 4 new ones and use them during the day, even if she had to speak them to herself while walking. After a few weeks, she told me she didn't need to think as much during conversations. The words were just there. That's the power of patterns. Another great thing about learning phrases is that it gives you structure, even when you don't know every word. For example, if you remember the phrase, "I don't know how to," you can plug in anything after it. "I don't know how to cook. I don't know how to explain this. I don't know how to use this app." That one simple phrase unlocks hundreds of sentences, and it keeps you speaking instead of stopping to search for new grammar rules. It's also okay if your phrase isn't 100% perfect. What matters more is whether people understand you. If you say, "I know understand," instead of, "I don't understand," most people will still get the message. But with practice, if you start repeating the full version, "I don't understand," again and again, it will become natural. The goal isn't perfection, it's clarity, it's connection. This is something I really want you to take to heart. Thinking in English doesn't mean thinking in complicated English. It means using clear, repeatable expressions that you can rely on. It means training your brain to respond in blocks instead of building sentences from individual bricks every time. So how can you start? Begin by listening closely to the way native speakers speak. Watch interviews, podcasts, or even shows with subtitles. Don't just focus on the meaning, focus on the patterns. Write them down. Speak them out loud. Use them in your voice notes or with friends or even when talking to yourself. One of the most practical exercises is shadowing. You hear a sentence and you repeat it right after, matching the speed and rhythm. Do this with phrases like, "I'll be there in 5 minutes. Let me think about it." Or, "I'm not sure yet." Say them again and again. That repetition trains your mouth, your memory, and your mindset. Language is not just about knowledge, it's about habit. And phrases are how habits are built. They're your shortcuts to fluency. They give you the power to speak without overthinking, to respond without freezing, to participate without fear. So next time you want to improve your English, instead of asking, "What new words should I learn today?" try asking, "What new phrases can I use today?" Because those phrases are what will carry you through your real conversations. When I first connected with Sofia, she was working at a small but very busy hotel in the heart of Rome. If you've ever been to Rome, you know how many tourists pass through every day from all over the world. Sofia, who had studied English in school and even taken some advanced classes later on, found herself stuck every time she tried to have a real conversation with guests. And it wasn't because she didn't know enough English. In fact, she knew a lot. Her grammar was solid, and she had a good vocabulary. But whenever someone spoke to her or asked a question, she would freeze. Her mind would immediately start, translating everything from Italian to English, trying to build the perfect sentence. By the time she found the right words, the conversation had already moved on. I remember her telling me about one day when a tourist asked her something simple, like where to find a good place to eat. She said she understood the question right away, but instead of answering naturally, her mind went into overdrive. She started forming a sentence in Italian, then trying to translate it into perfect English. She ended up pausing too long, stuttering, and then giving an answer that felt robotic. It wasn't what she wanted to say, and she knew the tourist, noticed how uncomfortable she was. That moment stayed with her because it made her feel like all her years of studying hadn't helped her when it mattered most. Sofia believed that if she didn't speak perfectly, she was failing. So she kept aiming for these long, impressive sentences with complex grammar, and that made her even more dependent on mental translation. The pressure was heavy, and it made her feel tense every time someone approached her at the reception desk. When they knew we started working together, I asked her to take a step back. I said, "Sofia, what if we just focus on being understood instead of being perfect? What if we make it easier for your brain by using short, natural phrases that you can rely on in real time?" At first, she wasn't sure. She had spent so much time trying to be flawless. It was hard for her to believe that something simpler could actually be more effective. But she decided to give it a try. We started by making a list of common situations she faced at work, checking in guests, giving directions, recommending restaurants, answering basic questions. Then we wrote down the simple phrases that fit those moments. Things like, "You can," "Take the metro from here," or "There's a nice place around the corner." Short, useful, real-life sentences. No pressure to sound perfect. Just clear, friendly communication. She practiced those phrases again and again, not just reading them, but saying them out loud. She shadowed audio clips, repeated dialogues from shows she liked, and even recorded herself speaking. Most importantly, she stopped trying to translate. She told me, "At first I felt like I was cheating, like I was avoiding real English by using short sentences. But then I realized I was finally communicating. Guests were smiling. I was answering faster. I didn't feel frozen anymore." A few weeks later, Sofia told me about a moment that changed everything for her. A group of tourists from the US had just arrived at the hotel, and they had lots of questions. About transportation, about nearby places to eat, even about local customs. Sofia answered all of them without needing to pause, without translating. She didn't overthink her grammar. She used simple, clear phrases. "There's a good cafe 2 blocks away." "You can take bus number 64. The museum opens at 9. She felt relaxed. The conversation flowed. And when they thanked her and said how helpful she had been, she felt something shift inside her. That was the moment she truly understood what it meant to think in English. It wasn't about having the most advanced vocabulary or using complicated sentence structures. It was about being present in the conversation, trusting her instincts, and letting the language flow naturally. After that, Sofia started building her own collection of useful phrases. She made a small notebook she carried with her, filled with expressions she heard at work, in movies, in podcasts. Every time she came across a phrase she liked or thought could be useful, she added it to the list. She wasn't studying English in the traditional sense anymore. She was living it. And because she wasn't translating anymore, everything felt lighter, easier. I remember her telling me how one of her favorite phrases became, "Let me check that for you." It was something she used at the front desk all the time. And before, she would try to construct a perfect sentence like, "I will verify the information and give you the answer in a moment." But now, with just a few words, she could sound professional, friendly, and fluent. That's the power of simplicity. That's the power of thinking in phrases, not in translations. Sofia's story is special because it shows how much pressure we sometimes put on ourselves to sound perfect. But perfection can be the enemy of progress. When you allow yourself to focus on connection instead of correctness, you start to build real fluency. You start to think in English because your brain stops needing to go back and forth between languages. It's like switching from walking with heavy boots to walking barefoot. You feel free. The change didn't happen overnight for her. It took daily practice, and it took courage to let go of that old belief that good English must be complex. But once she made that shift, she not only improved her English, she also enjoyed speaking it more. Guests noticed it. Her colleagues noticed it. And most importantly, she noticed it. She told me that now, when she thinks in English, she doesn't hear a translation in her head anymore. She hears a voice, her voice, responding naturally. And that's what thinking in English really means. not translating, not memorizing grammar rules in the middle of a conversation, but being there, in the moment, speaking from instinct, using the tools you've practiced, and trusting yourself. Sofia's journey is one I've seen in many learners around the world. From Seoul to Madrid to Nairobi, I've met people who carried the same fear of making mistakes, the same habit of translating everything before speaking. But like Sofia, they found freedom in simplifying, in using phrases, in giving themselves permission to speak naturally. And it all started with one choice: to stop translating and start thinking in English. One of the questions I hear most often is, "Julia, how do I actually train my brain to think in English?" It's a great question, and the answer is simpler than most people think. You don't need to move to an English-speaking country. You don't need to memorize 1,000 words every week. What you really need is consistency, repetition, and a mindset shift. You need to start using English in your daily life in a way that feels natural. Today, I want to share with you 3 techniques I personally love and recommend to anyone trying to think directly in English. These are simple, practical, and you can do them anytime, anywhere. The first technique is describing what you see around you in English. I call this the narrate your day method. It's as simple as it sounds. You wake up in the morning and instead of thinking, "I need to get ready for work" in your native language, you say it in English. I'm getting out of bed. I'm brushing my teeth. I'm making coffee. At first, it may feel awkward or even a bit silly, but what you're doing is powerful. You're replacing your native language with English as the default system in your mind. You can describe anything: what you're wearing, what the weather is like, what you're doing at the moment. I'm walking to the bus stop. The street is quiet. There's a woman walking her dog. You don't have to be poetic or complex. Just be clear. Use simple words. It's not about sounding advanced. It's about building automatic thinking. When you consistently describe your world in English, your brain starts creating shortcuts. You'll find that after a while, certain phrases pop up automatically. You won't need to translate anymore because the English version will be your first thought. One listener from Jakarta once told me that she made this her daily routine. Every time she cooked dinner, she spoke out loud in English. "I'm cutting the onions. Now I'm adding the salt. The rice is almost ready." She said that after a couple of weeks, she no longer had to force it. It just happened naturally. That's the power of this technique. It's like teaching your brain to live in English, even if just for a few minutes at a time. Now, the second technique is having internal dialogues in English. This one is fun, and it really helps build fluency. You basically start talking to yourself in English in your mind. Imagine you're in a situation where you would normally have to speak. For example, you're on your way to work. You imagine someone asking you, "What do you do?" And you respond mentally, "I work in marketing. I help companies promote their products online." Then maybe you imagine another question. "Do you like your job?" You answer, "Yes, I like it because it's creative and I get to work with different people every day." This is not about being perfect. It's about practicing real conversations. You're training your brain to respond quickly without translating. It's a great way to prepare for situations like job interviews, customer service roles, or meeting new people. And it works because it's active. You're not just listening or reading. You're participating. You're creating language inside your head. You can do this while walking, while waiting in line, or even while cleaning your room. Just pick a situation and start a silent conversation. You can even challenge yourself. Ask a question and answer it in 3 different ways. How was your weekend? It was relaxing. I stayed home. It was busy. I had to finish a project. It was great. I met some friends at a cafe. These small mental exercises build the muscle of thinking in English. The more you practice, the faster and more natural it becomes. The third technique I love is quick questions and answers with yourself. This is like a rapid-fire round, and it helps your brain respond without hesitation. You pick simple, everyday questions and answer them quickly without stopping to think too much. What's your name? My name is David. Where are you from? I'm from Cape Town. What do you like to do in your free time? I like to read books and go for walks. You can create a list of these questions and repeat them every day. The goal is not just to memorize the answers, but to build confidence and speed. If you do this regularly, you'll notice that your responses come more naturally. You won't need to search for words. They'll be there, ready when you need them. One listener from Istanbul told me he turned this into a morning routine. Every day before breakfast, he asked himself 10 questions in English and answered them out loud. At first it felt slow and uncomfortable, but within a few weeks, he said he could feel his brain responding in English faster than ever before. That's the result of training, not perfection, but progress. If you want to make this even more effective, try changing the questions every few days. Mix it up with things like, what's your favorite food? Or, what did you do yesterday? Or, what are your plans for the weekend? Make it personal. Make it real. The more relevant the question, the more invested your brain becomes in answering it. All these techniques have something in common. They focus on using English in your daily mental life. They are not about sitting down with a textbook. They're about making English a part of your thoughts, your routines, your day-to-day experiences. That's how real fluency is built. Not just by learning the rules, but by living the language in small, consistent ways. These techniques are also great because they remove the pressure of performance. You don't need an audience. You don't need to impress anyone. You're doing this for you. You're training your brain, your voice, your instincts. You're becoming fluent from the inside out. Thinking in English is a skill you build through practice. The more you train, the more automatic it becomes. And these techniques, describing what you see, having internal dialogues, and practicing quick questions and answers, are powerful tools to help you do that. Use them daily, even for just a few minutes, and over time, you'll start noticing the change. You'll start to feel that English is not just a subject you study, it's a language you live. Let me tell you the story of Haruto, a young man from Tokyo who, just like many of us, faced the common struggle of thinking in English. Haruto worked in a marketing firm, and like most people in big cities, he had a daily routine of commuting on the subway. Now, commuting in Tokyo can be quite an experience. The train is packed with people, and while it's not the most comfortable place, Haruto found a way to turn this daily challenge into a powerful learning opportunity. Every morning, as he stood on the crowded subway, Haruto would use the time to practice his English. But instead of studying vocabulary or listening to podcasts, he would create mental dialogues in English. He started with simple, everyday conversations, imagining himself in different situations. For example, when the train was crowded and he had to ask someone to move, he would practice how to politely ask, "Excuse me, could you please move a little?" Over time, this became a daily habit. Haruto would imagine conversations with coworkers, customers, or even strangers he might encounter on his way to work. One day, Haruto shared with me how this small practice of creating mental dialogues had helped him improve his English without him even realizing it. At first, he had doubts. He was unsure if imagining conversations in his mind would have any real effect. But after a few weeks, something clicked. He started noticing that, in real-life situations, he was no longer hesitating to respond in English. It was like he had built a mental framework for conversations, and when the opportunity arose, he could easily fill in the gaps with words and phrases he had already practiced. What Haruto didn't realize at the time was that his daily, 10-minute mental exercise was building his confidence in English. He was training his brain to react faster and more naturally. Instead of overthinking or translating from Japanese to English in his head, his brain had started making English a default response. His subway practice was like a workout for his mind. Each day, his English muscle got stronger and more flexible. This technique of using mental dialogues is something I often recommend to people who struggle with thinking in English. It's simple, effective, and doesn't require a lot of time or resources. Like Haruto, you don't need to wait for the perfect opportunity or the ideal learning environment. You can use everyday moments, like your commute, to practice. And let me tell you, the beauty of this is that it's entirely under your control. You don't need anyone else to practice with. You just need your mind and a little bit of creativity. Haruto would create scenarios where he was meeting new clients. He imagined himself walking into a meeting, introducing himself, and answering questions. "Hello, my name is Haruto. I've been with the company for 3 years." He would practice things like this, in his mind, every single day. The more he did it, the more natural it became. One thing Haruto noticed after a couple of months was that he stopped feeling nervous when speaking English. In the past, even when he knew what to say, he would often second-guess himself or worry about making mistakes. But through his mental dialogues, he had prepared himself for many different situations. And when the moment came, the words flowed easily. He no longer needed to translate his thoughts from Japanese into English, because in his mind, the conversation was already happening in English. I've seen this same transformation in many other learners, and it's always incredible to witness. When you practice mental dialogues, you're not just memorizing sentences. You're teaching your brain to think in English, to process information in English. The result is that when you need to speak, whether in a professional setting or a casual conversation, you'll find that your responses come more naturally. You won't need to pause and search for words. You'll be able to express yourself with confidence. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, "Julia, I don't know if I can do that. It feels awkward to talk to myself in my head, or I'm afraid I'll make mistakes." Let me tell you, Haruto felt the same way in the beginning. But as he continued with his mental dialogues, he found that making mistakes was part of the process. He didn't need to be perfect. The goal wasn't to create flawless conversations. The goal was to create a mental habit of using English in real-life scenarios. Over time, this habit made him more comfortable with the language, and eventually, he stopped being afraid of making mistakes. So, if you're thinking about trying this technique for yourself, I encourage you to start small. You don't need to have long conversations in your head right away. Begin with simple situations. Imagine how you would introduce yourself, ask for directions, or order food in a restaurant. The key is consistency. Just like Haruto did, try to dedicate 10 minutes every day to practicing mental dialogues. Choose a scenario that feels relevant to you. Maybe it's a conversation at work, at the store, or even with a friend. The more specific the situation, the more useful your practice will be. The beauty of this method is that you can do it anywhere, whether you're on the subway, walking to the store, or even waiting in line. You can create mental dialogues that help you think in English. It's a powerful tool because it integrates language practice into your daily life. It's not about isolating yourself from your routine or making time to study. It's about taking advantage of the moments you already have. Haruto's story is a great reminder that small changes in our daily routines can lead to big improvements in language. Learning, with just 10 minutes a day, he was able to transform his ability to think and speak in English. And if he can do it, so can you. All it takes is a little creativity, consistency, and the willingness to push past the initial discomfort of trying something new. So, next time you're commuting or waiting for something, think about how you can turn that time into an opportunity to practice English. Just like Haruto, you'll start to see the benefits of incorporating these mental dialogues into your routine. Over time, you'll notice that English feels more natural, and the hesitation will disappear. The best part is that you'll be practicing every day, even when you don't realize it. That's the power of mental dialogues. They'll help you become fluent without even trying. Let me tell you something that I've learned over the years of teaching and working with English learners. The key to thinking and speaking in English is to accept the simple and stop judging yourself. I know this may sound a little strange at first, but hear me out. So many people who are learning English get caught up in the idea that they need to speak perfectly, using complicated grammar or vocabulary. They think that if they can't speak with perfect fluency or sophisticated phrases, they're somehow failing. But that's not the case at all. The truth is, perfection isn't the goal. The goal is communication. For example, I want you to imagine something for a second. You're in a conversation and you have something important to say, but instead of focusing on getting your point across, you're stressing out about whether your sentence structure is perfect or if you've chosen the right word. You're trying to construct an elaborate sentence in your head while the person in front of you is waiting for you to speak. What happens? You freeze. You hesitate. You get caught up in your thoughts, trying to make everything sound just right. And what ends up happening is that the conversation stalls. You don't get to communicate effectively because you're focused on the wrong thing. Perfection. This is something I see time and time again in my students. They have the words, the ideas, and the knowledge, but they get stuck in this mental trap of trying to sound perfect. It's understandable, right? We all want to sound good when we speak, especially when we're speaking a second language. But here's the thing. Trying to speak perfectly often makes you sound less natural and more rigid. Instead of flowing with the conversation, you're stuck analyzing each word before it leaves your mouth. What I've learned, and what I encourage my students to embrace, is this. The simpler, the better. It's not about using long, complex sentences or showing off your grammar skills. It's about communicating clearly and confidently. You don't need to use fancy words or complicated phrases to get your message across. What matters is that you can express yourself, that you can be understood, and that the conversation continues naturally. Communication is the goal, not perfection. And here's where the real transformation happens. When you stop focusing on being perfect, you free yourself from the fear of making mistakes. You stop judging yourself every time you speak. You stop worrying about whether you've said something wrong or whether your accent is too strong. You let go of the need to impress others with how advanced your English is. And once you do that, something incredible happens. You start thinking in English more naturally. If you're always worried about how perfect your speech sounds, you're going to end up translating in your head. That's because when you're focused on being perfect, your mind doesn't have the space to think directly in English. you're still trying to figure out how to say something in a grammatically correct way, instead of just speaking freely. This process takes time, and it's completely normal. But what I want you to understand is that it's okay to make mistakes. In fact, making mistakes is part of the process. It's how you learn, it's how you improve, and it's how you gain confidence. I want to share a little story with you. I once had a student named Daniel, who was an intermediate-level English speaker. He was really good at understanding English and had a solid vocabulary. However, every time he spoke, he would get so caught up in trying to use the perfect words or structure that his speech came out slow and hesitant. He'd often stop mid-sentence to correct himself. And what? This made him sound less fluent than he actually was. He wasn't able to speak as confidently as he should have been, and his conversations felt stiff. One day I asked him, "Daniel, what's more important to you, speaking perfectly or communicating your thoughts clearly?" And he paused for a moment, thought about it, and said, "I guess communicating is more important." That was the turning point. I encouraged him to let go of the idea of perfection. Instead of focusing on complex sentences, I asked him to simply say what was on his mind using the words he knew. I told him to focus on being understood, not on sounding fancy. Over time, Daniel's speech became much more natural. He stopped second-guessing himself, and his sentences became shorter, more direct, and more fluid. He stopped thinking about every word and started thinking about the message he wanted to communicate. And you know what? His English improved significantly. He was speaking with more confidence, and the people around him noticed. The key was that Daniel had stopped judging himself and embraced simplicity. Now, I know this might feel uncomfortable at first. I know it's hard to accept that speaking simply is enough, especially if you've been taught to focus on grammar and advanced vocabulary for so long. But trust me, simplicity is not a weakness. It's a strength. The ability to communicate clearly, even with simple words, is far more valuable than speaking with complex sentences that only confuse people. Language is a tool for connection, and the simpler and clearer you are, the more you'll be able to connect with others. I also want to emphasize something really important. The goal of thinking in English is not to be fluent in the traditional sense. Fluency isn't about speaking as quickly as possible or using advanced words. Fluency is about ease of communication. It's about being able to express yourself clearly and confidently without getting stuck or overthinking. And that's what happens when you stop focusing on perfection and start focusing on simple, effective communication. Every time you speak, give yourself permission to be imperfect. Embrace the process of learning. Let go of the need to sound perfect and just focus on expressing yourself. The more you do this, the easier it will become to think directly in English. You'll stop translating, and you'll stop overthinking. You'll start thinking in English as naturally as you think in your first language. So the next time you catch yourself trying to make everything perfect, remind yourself, it's okay to keep it simple. Focus on communicating, not on perfection. And remember, every time you speak, you're getting better. The more you practice without judgment, the closer you get to thinking in English effortlessly. It's all about making it a habit, embracing simplicity, and letting go of that inner critic. When you do that, English will start to feel as natural as breathing. Let's take a moment to reflect on where you are in your journey with English. Think about it for a second. Do you catch yourself translating everything in your head before you speak? When you have a conversation in English, is your first instinct to try to find the exact translation of every word or sentence from your native language? I know many of you probably do this, and if that's you, don't worry. You're not alone. It's something that so many learners struggle with, and it's completely normal. But I want to ask you this. How different would your English be if you stopped translating everything in your head? How would it feel if you could speak with more fluidity, more confidence, without the need to pause and search for the perfect translation of every word? Imagine for a moment that you could just start thinking directly in English. No more mental gymnastics, no more frustration trying to figure out how to translate a sentence. Instead, you would be able to express yourself naturally, just like you do when you speak your native language. How much easier would conversations be? How much more confident would you feel? These aren't just hypothetical questions. They're entirely possible. But here's the thing. It's not something that happens overnight. The change comes with small, consistent practices every single day. And that's what I want to dive into with you right now. First, think about your current habits. What are the moments when you tend to translate the most? Is it when you're ordering food at a restaurant, chatting with a colleague, or perhaps speaking to a friend? These are the moments where you have an opportunity to break the habit. If you could take just a few moments every day to practice thinking in English in those situations, the change would be noticeable. It doesn't have to be a long process. In fact, you don't need hours of practice. What matters is consistency. A little practice every day is what will make the difference. Let's talk about some small ways you can start applying this idea today. It's not about making huge changes or doing anything drastic. It's about taking small, manageable steps that you can repeat regularly. For example, one easy way to start is by practicing simple descriptions of the world around you in English. I want you to look around your room or wherever you are right now and start describing things in English. It can be as simple as saying, "There's a red book on the table," or "The chair in front of me is black." This practice doesn't require perfect grammar or big vocabulary. It's about creating a habit of thinking in English rather than translating every thought from your native language. Another powerful technique is to set aside a few minutes every day for internal dialogue. This means thinking in English while you go about your day, even if you're not speaking to anyone. For instance, as you're getting ready in the morning, you can ask yourself questions like, "What should I wear today?" Or, "What do I need to do first?" The more you do this, the easier it will become. At first, it might feel a little strange or forced, but that's totally okay. The key is to keep practicing. You're building new neural pathways in your brain, and over time, it will feel more natural. Another great way to practice is through conversations with yourself. Yes, it might sound a little funny, but it works. Try imagining scenarios where you might need to speak English, like ordering coffee or asking for directions. Practice these short dialogues in your mind. For example, you could think, how do I say, "Can I get a coffee?" Or, "I need to ask how to get to the bus." Station. It doesn't matter if the conversation is with someone real or just in your mind. What matters is that you're forcing yourself to think in English without the filter of translation. Consistency is key here. It's not enough to do this practice once in a while and expect immediate results. To see real progress, you need to make it a part of your daily routine. But don't worry if you miss a day or two. The most important thing is to stay consistent overall. Even just 5 minutes a day can make a big difference. As you continue to practice, you'll begin to notice that your thoughts start shifting. You'll be thinking less in your native language and more directly in English. And that, my friend, is where the magic happens. Now, I know that change can feel overwhelming, and it's easy to get discouraged. You might find yourself thinking, "I've been translating for so long, how can I possibly stop now?" But remember, this process is gradual. It's not about perfection. It's about making progress, step by step. Each time you choose to think in English, you're moving closer to your goal of speaking more naturally. And even if you don't, feel like you're making huge strides right away. Trust that every little bit counts. The beauty of this process is that it's not about reaching some ideal of perfection. It's about becoming comfortable with imperfection. You don't need to speak like a native speaker. You don't need to have flawless grammar. What matters is that you can communicate your ideas clearly and confidently. That's the goal. The more you practice thinking in English, the more natural it will feel. And the more natural it feels, the easier it will be to speak without hesitation or fear. As you start applying these practices to your daily life, I want you to remember one very important thing. Don't be too hard on yourself. This is a journey, and there will be times when you make mistakes. That's okay. Embrace the mistakes because they're part of the learning process. Every time you try and fail, you're one step closer to mastering the art of thinking in English. So let's do a little exercise together right now. I want you to take a deep breath and ask yourself, what small change can I make today to start thinking in English more naturally? It doesn't have to be a big change, just one small step. Maybe you'll start describing things around you in English. Maybe you'll practice a dialogue in your head. Whatever it is, make a promise to yourself to do it today. And remember, change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, consistent steps. The more you practice, the easier it will become. The more you practice, the more natural it will feel. So don't rush it. Embrace the process and know that every time you think in English, you're building a new habit, a new way of communicating, and a new version of yourself as an English speaker. And trust me, you've got this. Thank you so much for staying with me throughout this episode. I really appreciate you being here and taking the time to listen. It's moments like these that remind me of the incredible community we've built together here at the English Talk community. Whether you're listening from a busy street in New York, a quiet cafe in Paris, or somewhere far away in Asia, we are all connected through one shared goal: to learn and grow in our English journey. It's such a powerful thing to realize that we are part of a global community, all supporting each other to improve, to learn, and to get one step closer to speaking English confidently and naturally. When you listen to this podcast, you're not just listening to tips or advice. You're part of something much bigger. You're part of a group of people who understand the challenges, who share the same frustrations and successes, and who are committed to making progress every single day. And that's what makes this journey so special. It's not just about learning English. It's about supporting each other, sharing our experiences, and growing together. As we wrap up today's episode, I want you to take a moment and think about everything we talked about. Remember, the goal is not perfection. It's about progress. It's about being kind to yourself as you learn, accepting that mistakes are part of the process, and celebrating every small victory along the way. And if you feel like you're not there yet, don't worry. You're exactly where you need to be. Each day is another opportunity to practice, to improve, and to get a little bit closer to your goal. I want to encourage you to keep the momentum going. The road to fluency is built on consistency and practice. So, if you found today's episode helpful, I suggest you keep listening to our podcast. Every new episode brings you more tips, more strategies, and more stories to keep you motivated. And if you want to keep building on what we talked about today, I would love for you to join me in the next episode, where we'll dive into even more ways to enhance your English skills. Before I go, I want to remind you to take a moment to like this episode if you found it valuable. By doing that, you're helping us reach even more people who need this kind of support. And if you know someone who struggles with translating in their head, someone who could really benefit from thinking in English more naturally, share this episode with them. Together, we can help more people make progress, build their confidence, and truly start thinking in English. That's what this community is all about, helping each other move forward. So, take what you've learned today and apply it. Start small, be consistent, and most importantly, be kind to yourself as you continue on this journey. The fact that you're here, listening, and willing to take action is a huge step forward. I'm so proud of you for investing in your growth, and I can't wait to hear about the progress you make. Thank you again for being part of this incredible community. I'll see you in the next episode, and remember, we're all in this together. Keep practicing, keep growing, and keep thinking in English.